What will the market look like over the next 10 years, 2030? I get to do this a lot or sit on the other side a lot. It's rare that I get to do it with a panel of people that are so well esteemed. Carolina Abenante, got it right? The co-founder of NYIAX, unbelievable background. Monique Nelson, the CEO of UniWorld, multicultural agency at WPP, and Emily Del Greco from S4 Capital, president of MightyHive and the CMO there. So it's great to be able to have a really accomplished group of people to talk about and who have seen a lot and to talk about what may be coming up. So we prepped a couple of things and we skipped a couple, but we're going to jump in and we'll start with what's the biggest lessons this industry should have learned and hasn't learned over the past 20 years, and how will that help us figure out things to do in the future? So as our host with the most, do you want to go first?
Well, I'd like to actually thank everybody on this panel, and I'm really happy that this is a panel of women, because I think that brings a lot to the diversity that we haven't been talking about in this industry for a very long period of time. And that is also one of the things that we haven't learned for the last 20 years, is more inclusion in this industry. But more importantly, not more importantly, other things that have not happened in our industry for it to be as the depth and breadth that we would want to have and the transformation that we need is actually transparency and an idea of compliance in this industry. We've done patchworkings, dealing with data, dealing with anti-fraud, dealing with viewability. We haven't looked at anything from start to finish on how to really assess this industry, make it bigger, and create a secondary market so we can enhance it.
Do you think, I mean, you bring up an actually really interesting point. You know, I grew up at MTV and Turner a long time ago when there was no internet. Well, there was DARPANET, but there was no commercial internet. And they did this business on a handshake.
Yes.
Has the business become too complicated in so many different ways that it hasn't grown up from that handshake business?
You know, in our prior panel, they've talked about the complexity and what they call the fat middle that existed. There is a lot of complexity in our industry, and we've caused that complexity by creating patchworks. With the patchwork of programmatic that came at the end piece of post-trading ideas and not looking at it as a more fluid idea from start to finish, we have created our own complexities for it. It didn't have to be this way. We could have made high-speed trading very quickly, very easily, if we started from the beginning.
Okay, Monique?
Hi. I agree wholeheartedly, but certainly one of the things that I see that has not changed nearly as fast as it needs to, of course, is inclusion. The absolute ability to talk to everyone in the room. We have this magical device that will allow us to be much more contextual and absolutely much more impactful if we just worked a little harder. Ultimately, I feel like this industry can get a little lazy when it comes to doing the extra digging, and some of that work is going to be necessary as we move through the 2020s and beyond.
Has the industry not, just like the industry hadn't caught up to the handshake, has the industry not caught up to the changing demography of our country in the last 20 years?
They have not, and it's something that we've all known, right? Everyone knows that we're going to this multicultural America. We're going to the browning of the globe, actually. It's not just a US phenomena. Half of the population, we talked about this being an all-female panel. This is probably pretty unique, but it shouldn't be. We're 50% of the population, right? We should be 50% of everything. So I think we have a long way to go. But I'm excited to be at the forefront of making sure that that's what we do, because I think for brands, it's imperative for their survival that they recognize everyone that could recognize them.
Emily?
Wow, so many great comments that I am wholeheartedly in agreement with. You know, I would, to echo what Carolina said, I think I've been in advertising for 18 years, ad tech for about 10 of those, and I feel like we've been plagued by a lot of short-term thinking, motivated by profit and greed, and less around problem solving. And I think, working on the services side of the business, having come from the tech side, I think marketers and publishers, for that matter, content owners, are all plagued with problems, and their business is being severely disrupted. And what they don't need are short-term solutions that are designed to create a middleman who's going to take a piece. They need somebody who's going to come in and really think through what their next 3 to 5 to 10 years looks like and build solutions. So less short-term thinking, and that, I've seen it, so many times in the industry. Well, first we need to have a whole suite of services just for mobile. Then we need to have a whole suite of services just for native. And we've all been through this, where VCs fund 10, 20 of those companies. They all grow really, really big and then collapse. And we're still not really solving the bigger problems. So I think that's something that we should really learn from before we embrace the next new thing. And on the diversity and inclusion front, I couldn't agree more. And I'm surprised at the amount of resistance that I still encounter, particularly dealing with marketers who are going in-house, who are very eager to say, well, now technology allows me to buy my own media, but they don't really think through who's going to be buying that media. What is the profile of those individuals? How do you organize them, motivate them, and incentivize them? And if you're selling MyDoll and you have a team of 10 men working on that media brand, do you really have the voice of the brand, buying the media? So I couldn't agree more with what the co-panelists said.
There's a lot to unpack with what you just said.
Sorry.
One of the interesting things that's always troubled me is the thought of what you talked about, short-term and long-term thinking, yet the 8 white men that are running the holding companies are being held by Wall Street to this quarter's results. And how are they going to change that? And let's be honest, how are they going to start thinking longer term about that? Which I think is something that is very interesting to me. And I also want to ask you back about your last statement. Having been one of the few people that's been a publisher, a network, and a ad tech and an agency CEO, even though a little one, I'm gobsmacked by hearing clients say they want to take it in-house. I don't see, honestly, how they can really do that. When I see the complexity of what you just said, how maybe the biggest 3 could do it. But other than that, I don't understand how they think they're going to handle, and I can't say where it's from, but I know at least one holding company has done a audit. It's something like 3,500 systems around the world to buy, sell, maintain, and measure every type of media in the 198 countries that a multinational will do. How in the world can somebody really take that in-house? They need a MightyHive to help them. I'm sorry.
Yes, exactly.
And they need a multicultural agency to help them with that.
They do. They need a long-term strategy.
I'm getting there.
They need a long-term, diverse strategy. I think that, in-housing is one of those things that's become a kind of polarizing word, and we inherited it as part of the branding of our agency because we take marketers, in-house. But frankly, it's much more complex and nuanced than that. And
but they're not taking it in-house on their own, right?
Well,
you're doing
no,
that.
they're not. But in-housing is not a binary state of affairs. It's not like, guess what? I'm done. I don't need. I've replaced every single agency function, and I'm now standing on my own. It's more a reflection of I want greater transparency and control, and I believe that some of these core functions should live within the 4 walls of my company. And so I don't think we at MightyHive expect everybody is going to go fully in-house. In fact, I can name on one hand, the marketers who are truly fully in-house. I think everybody else is going to end up somewhere on the spectrum of control of saying, I've got some specialist outsourced consultative teams that help me, whether it's with innovation or multicultural. I know it doesn't make financial sense for my company to employ 25 people who are experts on multicultural advertising, given my business. I need to go to experts for that. But for the day-to-day, digital media, meat and potatoes, I want to run that in-house because all the data that goes into it and the data that comes out of it is a core asset for me. So I think it's a trade-off. And I think in this middle ground, in this messy middle that we all live in, there's a huge opportunity for firms like ours that are just starting with a clean sheet, which gets to your first point about how do you actually have long-term thinking when you're managing to a quarterly revenue target. And I can't say there's an answer because it's really hard.
And the thing is, you may let someone down on the street as you are moving through this. And I think you've got to get better at knowing that there's investment that has to happen. You may not have that stellar quarter because you need to invest. And there are key things that have to change. We have systems that have to change. Everything, talking about the patchwork of it all, it's, we can't keep stringing this together. At some point, we're going to have to make an overhaul because we have to get it agile. To your point, I worked at Motorola. I was on the in-house advertising team, right? We had Ogilvy, we had BBDO, we had the Fish Can Sing, we had a bunch of agencies, but we as a core advertising team managed the strategy, understood where we were going, and ultimately how to direct the agencies. And I think it's a hybrid model. It's an and, not an or.
Yes, and in down times, what happens in a lot of corporations is they let people go. And the easiest place to let people go is in marketing. So when they start building out so much of this that they can then actually cycle back to an agency afterwards, you have this ebb and flow of what's going to happen. But their strategic core team in any in-house needs to exist. Otherwise, they're never going to understand their customer.
So to one of your first points, it always bothers me that clients are now saying, I'm going to pay you in 180 or 360 days. Does that make it harder on the agencies and the suppliers? They're not using systems to help make it easier to pay. Is that part of the problem too?
Well, it's part of the problem also for the media. The media, they would give you more media. They would do a better job if they could get paid sooner.
Right.
Whether it's on trade, whether it's in a shorter period of time. And that can be effectuated very easily if they start working with a lot of the factors, the banks, that will then take on the risk.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're talking about, is also that risk play for the payments.
So you also mentioned in the earlier statement the fact that we don't have this consistency across things. What do you think is going to happen when all of a sudden programmatic hits OTT and programmatic hits linear television? That's another $72 billion market that can get just blown up.
Absolutely, and honestly, even with digital programmatic, we don't have like a standardized taxonomy or language that speaks among and between platforms. There could be so many things that could be done to streamline it, and you can streamline in every single different asset class, whether it's OTT, whether it's linear TV. Each asset class should have a basic.
But if agencies are under so much trouble, why wouldn't they try to do stuff like this, like streamline it? I mean, we've been talking about these same things for the last 20 years. We're trying to say what's going to happen in the next 10 years. If we haven't learned our lesson, they're under duress every single day of their life. Why wouldn't they try to streamline it and try to find better solutions that you're talking about?
Well, I think they are looking at better solutions at this point in time. I think they're becoming a lot smarter, and some of this also has to do with regulation that's coming. They're looking at it through they're looking at it at a very narrow focus to try to assess privacy, and they want to speak in one language for now, privacy. So that is one area that they're doing it. When you don't have regulation in back of something, it doesn't give them an impetus to do things in a right order.
So do you think privacy could be a backdoor way to get people to think through their systems?
Absolutely.
Monique, what do you, from your point of view?
I mean, I think we're in the age now of permission. I think consumer permission is the wave. I think we have to. I think we owe it to them. We're taking their data, and we're not necessarily compensating them for it.
Do you think the pendulum swung too far in programmatic?
Absolutely.
And that's why it's snapping back?
Absolutely. And people know, and they feel violated, right? They feel like there is no gate. They have no control. And that will be not just pushback. I think it'll be revolution.
I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, but something you said earlier really struck me. The browning of the world. In one way, should every agency be multicultural?
Yes.
And there's no need for you? But on the other way,
no, I'll just
you're
be the
doing
best.
Great, right? I mean, it's funny when you think about it. There really isn't a need for you, but because they're not doing it, it's great for you, right?
all at the same time.
Right?
Kind of.
I'm sitting there going, wait a second, this is really, she's right, this is a great idea. What a great pivot spot for you to be in for a while.
Well, we've been doing this for 50 years,
Yeah.
so I got to tell you, I'm
Is
not
it ready
that
to
hopeful.
turn?
I'm hopeful that we are aware. I have to say that. I think there is a heightened awareness now that I don't think has been there over the last 10 years. I think it's been a lot of Heisman. Like maybe later, I don't know. It's not affecting me right now. It's going to affect me at some point. I'll deal with it then. And I think we're at a point now from a social standpoint, especially here in the US, we don't have to name names, where there's just pressure in terms of, well, what are you saying and what do you mean in whatever microaggression language we're talking about, and how is that showing up in your world? And brands now, I think, are under a great deal of pressure, and agencies as well. And we do all kinds of support, whether it be agency support to come in and help them kind of see the world differently. A lot of this will come down to a re-education and a reorientation around what do we have that works now, what do we have that needs to change completely, and then ultimately, what does that mean looking forward? So we're going to be in constant evolution because, unfortunately, humans are unpredictable.
Well, that brings back to diversity. And when you said that, is there a need for that? Of course there's a need for that. So with Emily's question about the MightyHive, you don't have 10 men in a room talking about MightyHive for this. You have to have people that represent that sort of individual in order to bring in a multicultural idea and to actually understand the individual. And then when you get to that point, then you go down to the exact individual, which would be the sovereign identity.
So now let's take identity and ID, and let's talk about what I think some of the mistakes of the last 10 years are. And so I'm an individual. I happen to like watching Premier League soccer, and the clips are on ESPN. Now, I'm not registered for ESPN, but I know ESPN's got the technology. I'll go watch a couple of clips on a Sunday or a Monday, and they're all about 1.5 to 2 minutes long. And I'm not making fun of Geico, they show me the same 30-second Geico ad in front of every one of those. And I'm like, wait a second, knuckleheads. I know the technology's there. First of all, it's under 2 minutes. Don't show me an ad that's more than 6 seconds long.
Right.
Please, dear God, not do this to me. And second of all, frequency capping. Right. So let's come back to identity. I think one of the things that's bothered me over the last 10 years is we haven't solved the fact, and I know Lou Pascalis is gonna be on the next panel from B of A, we're not telling a story. We're using this. We're using this technology, which is hyper local, hyper one-to-one, kind of getting close to that. But then we use the same shotgun approach that we were selling at MTV a long time ago. Oh, we got teens here. Give me your money. We're gonna run your ad against teens.
Spraying and praying.
Right. So how do we think about the next 10 years with multicultural, diversity, brown, everybody else? But how do we get to real identity? Is there a way for us to get to real identity, and how do we start changing advertising?
Well, they were talking in the prior panel, we actually had the SVP from Expedia, and with Trivago, they were doing dynamic ads to the individuals based on what they were doing themselves. And they were telling more of a story about that.
That's cool,
individual.
right?
It is, but they're so specialized, they're in a specialized vertical of how they have it. And Trivago does that data learning, and they have a lot of information about you.
And then what happens when somebody opts out?
That's the problem with that. That is a problem with identity.
And in the CCPA, the Attorney General said, if they opt out, you can't give them less of an offer.
That's true.
So that's something that I think people haven't, I don't think, when I talk to agency people, they're like, huh? I'm like, yeah, you can't say to Monique, I'll give you 5% off, and Carolina, if she opts out, she gets the same 5% off.
Absolutely.
This is gonna be crazy.
Well, the person that opts out, more than likely, doesn't want the 5%, right? And you've got to figure out what that engagement looks like, right?
Tell that to the class action lawyers in California.
Tell
They're
it,
gonna sue against that.
exactly. But again,
Excuse me.
But now you better ask, right? You better ask permission,
Right.
and you better let me describe,
Right.
right? And let the person self-select, right?
Yes.
And put themselves out there. I think identity is exactly what you want to be.
How does that then change advertising? Does it change the way creatives think? Does it change the way operations think? What does it do to advertising in the next 10 years?
I mean, it should. It should. Let's hope. I hate to bring it up, but I think a lot of this comes down to thinking more long term about what we're trying to do as marketers. And so much of the last 10 years has been people pouncing on a single inefficiency and making that tactic or the fighting that one inefficiency their entire strategy. And there's a huge difference between having a marketing strategy and planning, how do I want to engage with my customers and prospects writ large, period. How do I want to show up to them? What do I want to say to them? What value do I want to deliver? And really keeping that first and foremost. And then coming down to, right now, there's a crisis in identity that's come down to, changes in regulation, people over-exploiting, loopholes. And, we now don't even have a really solid sense of what identity is. And it varies by, each marketer, absolutely at this point. So I think we have to get back to the fundamentals of what we're trying to accomplish. With identity, we're seeing people make very short-term decisions even now about, the biggest leaders in the market are saying, I can't have this data anymore, okay? But the smaller players are saying, I can. The biggest leaders in the market technologically, when they make decisions like this, and it's quick, trust and believe they're not business decisions, they're legal decisions. Somebody in their legal department is saying, hey, and they could afford to have legal departments that are thinking 5, 10, 20 years out. They're saying, this data is not going to be available anymore. It is today, it's not going to be available in 3 to 5 years. So when they say, no, we're not going to use the data anymore, it creates a temporary inefficiency for people that are used to dealing with it. Rather than say, well, I'm going to go use the secondary or tertiary vendor who still gives it to me, you have to really be thinking about what Google or Amazon or whomever is doing is the future that I'm going to have to adjust to. Maybe I don't have to do it now, but 18 months to 2 years from now, this is going to be my reality. Am I set up for this? Do I have the type of talent? Do I have the infrastructure? Do I have even the common understanding with a CEO that this is now my responsibility as a CMO? And I think just too often we're like, well, this platform will give me the data. It's like, well, is that really the game we want to be playing?
No.
You've jumped down to a deeper question that we have, which is later on, which is how's this going to affect the stakeholders going forward? Because did it unintended consequences make the walled gardens more walled and the ecosystem less diverse? Because there's less of ability to reach people and find people. That could be a terrible outcome of this, right?
Well, that was one of the things from GDPR when it came out. It actually put more power into Google and Facebook rather than what they actually intended to do, which was really, their full intention was to break them apart. Let's be honest. That was one of the major intentions of GDPR. But they put this horrible onus then by Google onto the publisher itself for the certifications on it to be GDPR compliant. So you have this unintended consequence of a legislation that came out that was a little bit broken on what it wanted to achieve. But what Emily was saying, I know that one of the best companies that was working on this thing, working on GDPR and also CCPA, Microsoft, had been working on it for over 4 years beforehand. They were GDPR compliant a year and a half beforehand. And they work with these great companies like mParity that actually can pull out the data into its separate siloed areas. Because it's not just about advertising data. It's about every aspect. It's also your in-house and commercial information. It's about data in toto, not just advertising. And we have to be respectful of this because we're in a larger ecosystem than just advertising.
You said it, how can the small players deal with this? It's going to disenfranchise the small players then, which maybe the player's looking more at diversity, more in inclusion, and you're just got this walled garden that becomes less open.
Right. I do think that it's going to come to, having worked at a mobile-first DSP and also having worked at Google, I think there's a small window in time if you're getting business because you're manipulating or exploiting one inefficiency in the market. Trust and believe the duopoly will eventually deal with that. It might not be today, it might not be next year. And so it's gonna, we've all seen the Lumascape and it's starting to consolidate. We're reaching more of an equilibrium. But if you've got that one thing that you do, and that's holding up your entire business, you have to ask yourself, how long can I keep playing this game? I think there's gonna be a lot of real thinking around did I just have this? Do I have all of my revenue coming down to one inefficiency that can be wiped out? We've learned this lesson. We should have learned this lesson so many times, whether it's Google or Facebook. I mean, companies that were existing and robust and leading suddenly gone with one feature change.
So how do you think the major stakeholders from the content side, whether they be a Disney or a CBS Viacom, how are they going to fight that wall of Google and Facebook in this world of identity and privacy going forward?
They're all doing it a little bit differently, right? I think Xandr and AT&T have a really interesting, asset. It's mostly U.S., right?
Yeah.
So that is not really a solution, and it's pretty niche right now. But at the same time, they've got a lot of assets there, and you see, AT&T doing that. Comcast has its own kind of approach, and I think part of we're trying to go back to what is the purpose of what we do on the digital ad side, particularly if you're in delivery, which is my heritage. And I worked for Neil Mohan at Google, and the one thing he would say 10 years ago was, what we do here is keep the internet free. And I think working on both the buy and sell side of my career, the buy side forgets that there is another stakeholder here, and I think we've all, at the risk of being political, I think we all kind of understand the value of a free press nowadays. And so I think I very much am interested in solving this, coming at it from the buy side, but helping the investments get to, first of all, real publishers. Let's start with that. And then maybe publishers that are doing great work.
So let's talk about fraud. I mean, it's a big issue, and I'm concerned that it has not been tackled in the last 10 years well enough.
No, it hasn't been fully addressed because how we're looking at least from my perspective, how we're looking at this is we don't have a streamlined contract process. And when you look at a more streamlined contract process, and also who you're dealing with, and how you're placing together your infrastructure play, you are going to be dealing with more and more fraud. It's less so on the top 80 to 100 sites, and much more on the long tail of this.
But did the people that control those exchanges, the big ones without naming people, did they not do a good job of vetting that long tail?
Of course. I mean, we talked about this
So it was
before,
a softball, I'm sorry.
Of course.
Sometimes the setter sets and the spiker springs.
Of course. I mean, we saw this for at least from what I know from 2016, but it was even.
So does
before that.
privacy then help us block that?
It should, to a certain extent, but you also have to know what kind of publishers you're going to be working with. You have to know your counterparties in the trade. When you don't understand your counterparties inside of a trade, you're always going to have, you can go fallow and have always some sort of fraud that will come into the system.
It's almost impossible for an advertiser to know all the counterparties in programmatic when they're buying.
Not true.
Well,
it's absolutely not true. If you can do it in a streamlined process, you can know everybody that's part of it. It
who's
depends
doing that?
on.
You're right, but who's doing it?
We're doing that. So yes.
But which advertisers are doing it? See, she liked that setup. Which advertisers are doing it?
Well, listen, advertisers want to know their counterparty. It makes them. It's very important to them to understand where their ads are appearing. So if they are on any system that allows them to see their counterparties or any of the counterparties down the line, and okay, these are all more curated systems rather than anything else.
Than
so
an
you have to
open
say,
exchange.
of course. Then they can know everybody that's part of that trade.
Monique, when you look at identity, is there going to be are you worried at all that there may be a what's the right word? A bad imbalance with a lower income set that does want to have access to goods and advertising, where they don't have the option to get the right kind of offers or advertising in a marketplace like this?
Well, I think we're in a trust scenario,
Okay.
right? I think it's about a trusted source, and wherever that comes from. The one thing about communities that are underserved, whether that be LGBT, differently abled, different ethnicities, they are super, super resourceful, right? Like they're not going to be left behind.
Okay.
They won't. They haven't, right? Remember, we all remember this digital divide, right? Remember, it was like, well, if you're poor, then you're off the net. That's not true, right? They found a way, and then they revolutionized here, right? They didn't have to go to a desktop, right? Just like going to Asia. They weren't going to lay landlines in China, right? It went straight to mobile. And I think there's always going to be that resourcefulness. These communities are always very resilient because they know they're working with more. They're doing more with less. And that is not going to change. Right?
It's interesting when you watch some of the advertising in India that people never had a landline and they went right to mobile.
Never did.
Some of the cool stuff that Unilever was doing there with the sachets and all the, all that stuff was like, blew my mind. I was like, that is so cool.
Absolutely, and that's where innovation comes from,
Yeah.
right? Like at the end of the day, innovation will come out of either a lack of, and that's why it's so important to have more people at the table rather than less, because you wouldn't even know that solution. Right? If those of us that come, and I mean, we are all extremely, I can probably say in this room, we're pretty well off. We're not worried about, tomorrow. Yeah. But for those that are, you'd be surprised what they can make, right? And that thought process is so key and important to solving these problems moving forward. And I just don't think we have enough brains around it that feel differently. As much as I think we look different in this room, we probably think a lot.
Well, does that talk about what Emily was saying? Does your agency have a different sense of how you do planning because of that?
We absolutely do. We look at mass culture meeting niche culture, and ultimately, what does that tension deliver, right? Because it's the same product, but a trans person may use it differently.
I mean, you have a great business thesis about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so much about the actual engagement with whatever said product is, and that will vary by, by culture, by community, by geography, you name it. We can't dictate that. They now have the ability to tell us, and we should be listening.
Does anybody at the larger, I'm going to ask a terrible question.
Oh, Lord.
Does anybody at the larger WPP look at your success here and try to translate this, probably the right next generation way to look at planning, into the other agencies?
We've not seen that yet, have we? No. They try. I don't think they quite know. You've got to know about that consumer.
Because you're actually saying what Emily's saying is you got to rethink how you do the strategic long-term plan.
All the time. All the time. And
it changes fast,
and it
right?
changes super fast. People are, let's look at Nike, right? We could take Nike right now. There was a day, the day before they put out the Kaepernick ad,
Yep.
right? There was a certain sentiment about Nike, right? Like, no bones about it. That next day, people went, oh, well, this is where Nike stands. That's a different world, right? And there was nothing you could have done.
By the way, the sword cuts both ways.
Sure does.
What's happening with Salazar, the coach towards women,
That's right.
There's a very different thought.
That's right.
When my wife went to get a new pair of trainers of, okay. I don't really like that.
That's right.
And that's the world we live in.
That's it.
That this stuff travels, I know the comment is a lie travels 3 times around the world before the truth gets out of bed.
Yeah.
Sure.
But that also means these things have such a speed and an acceleration.
Absolutely, and that means you have to have an ethos, right? It's not to say that you won't make a mistake, right? But the ethos has to be we're trying.
It's how they respond to that.
Right? We're working on it. It's not that all of us will make a mistake, right? We're all fallible at some point, but we've got to be able to say.
Except blockchain.
Except
Blockchain never makes a mistake. Blockchain, it's an immutable contract. It's like locked in stone. Even Hercules couldn't break it.
I love it. Well, let's put it
Apparently
everywhere.
it is.
All right, we're getting a little weird. I'm trying to watch time, so Lena didn't throw a tomato at me, but I want to ask some more upbeat questions. So, Emily, what are you most optimistic about?
I am really optimistic about millennial talent, which I feel like, my average age at MightyHive is 26. And so I've worked in a lot of different places in my career. I've never worked with this many young people. And I see a lot of the choices that they are making, as challenging as those choices may be to the norms that we've set up in our businesses. I think they demonstrate good things for the future of work. The trade-offs that they're willing to make, the discussions around, I'm just not going to work 60 hours a week. It's not going to happen. Sorry. But by the way, I still expect to be promoted.
By the way, if I didn't show up 100 hours at MTV in 1985, there was another person who would take my production
That's
manager
right.
job in a heartbeat.
That's
If when they walked in and said, we got another live shoot, you just got off the plane, would you get on the plane?
Yes.
If I didn't do it, there was 50 people who wanted that job at MTV. And I just got on the plane and went and did the next live shoot.
I am with you.
Right.
I
It's
did
like,
not.
no, I'm not-
We're not allowed to transfer the pain.
No.
Right. And moreover,
We should. No, I know, but it's like we can't haze. We're not allowed to
Right.
haze.
Right.
We have to
But there's a learning that goes on with the hazing.
Exactly.
That actually helps significantly to build them into very strong caliber of leaders.
I think they're going to reject that.
Oh, I know they will.
I didn't mean, we got bad there. Sorry, we got sideways, Emily.
No, it's all right. It's all right.
So you're optimistic about millennials.
I'm optimistic about the new workforce
The new
in
workforce
marketing.
at
Yes.
their 20-hour work week. So we're going to be
Yes.
France. It's great.
That's right.
I wouldn't go 20 hours. I just
That's
think in
terrible. I love
general
France.
the
I'm kidding.
perspective, the
35.
perspective is I think useful for us.
All right. You're going to cut that part, Lana, when I made fun of France? Thanks.
Right.
Monique?
I'm going to agree. I am with the Gen Z. I love them. I think they are awesome. I think they are reinventing human engagement. I was, telling my colleagues over the holiday, I spent time with my goddaughter, and she talked to me about these kickbacks. And that they have these really cool, which she was telling me was novel. Before they, go out, some people, they come over to somebody's house and they do meals and they do a little music and, we used to call it pre-gaming. But now it's, it's a kickback. And I was like, okay.
Monique, I'm like,
and they're
wait a
actually
second,
talking.
You've done that, right?
I know. But for a while, we hadn't been, right? Everything's been like this. And I saw kids like, do you talk? I literally was at a table with young people and they texted across the table. I was like, she's right there. What are you doing? So I'm really excited that, my, 19-year-old goddaughter was, really craving, all phones go to the side during this kickback time and they are only talking to one another and they're just engaging and they're feeling and they're energizing and I'm super excited about that.
That's
I think
awesome.
we've missed the
Carolina?
human connection.
Well, I'll take on to the millennials as well for a different reason. I'm really happy that they want to actually own their identity. And they want to understand where their data is being sent to. And I think that this bodes well for regulation coming in and trying to really kickstart this industry into having something that's transformational, that we can really have the rigor that we want to have inside of it. And I would hope that millennials would want to talk rather than to talk across the table with the text.
I'm going to ask 2 more questions, and we're going to get really quick answers, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So, last 2 questions. The last one, second to last one. Emily, what's your greatest fear?
I'd say my greatest fear is missing something. The industry is moving at such a fast pace. There's regulatory issues. There's changes in the media landscape. Advertisers are having to face this. It's so challenging to stay on top of all of it. My greatest fear is missing something as a manager, as an operator, and as an advisor of marketers.
Monique?
I think one of my biggest fears is the fact that we are almost razor thin with channels. I think we are just oversaturated with stuff, and it's hard to organize. And I think we're struggling with what's really impactful versus what's just noise. And I just feel like we're okay with noise, and we've got to get better at substance.
Carolina?
Well, I mean, something that's really right at this point in time. I am worried that if we don't have some kind of uniform privacy law from the federal government, that we're going to have a patchwork of different laws that come out of here from state to state. And that is troublesome for anybody inside the advertising business. Because if you have to deal from state to state and people traveling from one place to another, it will be horrendous for advertisers that want to use audience-based data.
Can I ruin your Wednesday?
No, I know that you
We
have
got
a thing.
no shot to have
I
a
know
federal
that.
law in the next 3 years. They can't even decide what they're having for lunch.
I understand that. I
Come on.
understand that.
Can I give my fear? Would you guys make? All right.
Yes.
So you know what my biggest fear is?
Yes.
My biggest fear is we haven't really dealt with fraud in the last 10 years, and we're going to turn around and go forward, and we're going to automate TV, which is still a $72 billion business, even if the ratings are half of what Scott Weller, who's in the room, and I used to sell 20 years ago before digital, 25 years ago. And I think privacy is going to impact a lot of stuff, and I think it should. I think in 2015, Obama at the State of the Union said we're going to have a federal data security law in a year, and we have 50 states later. And I think agencies have not, and marketers and publishers, and especially ad tech, have not woken up to this. And I think they look at GDPR and say, whatever. And I think CCPA and then Nevada, and there's about 27 states in committee. I think it's going to be a hammer blow to everybody. And I think it's going to mess up everything, and people are not taking this seriously. And I think it's going to screw people up greatly.
But when they start taking it seriously, because now,
I think it transforms our industry.
When you have fines,
I think it transforms our industry.
people will take it seriously.
People don't get that if you buy 50 million impressions programmatic tomorrow in California on Women 2054 and you use for your consent, for your location and for your consent management, and they blow it, and you hit 2 million unique women 25 to 54 that you thought, and there was no consent string, and the AG comes after you and you didn't have a plan, and it's $7,500 per for that 2 hours.
There's a second piece on
Per.
it. There's also the private right of action of the
Right, so
individual.
then they can class action sue.
So, and there are going to be tons of attorneys that will get together to do class action suits. And why? Because it's easy. It's easy. It's strict liability and tort. And
crazy.
they
And
don't have to
California
show any
has a
kind of
history of
idea
that.
of why the damages happened. You don't have to show it. That's a problem.
It's crazy. And I think, and everyone's like, oh, it's January 1st. They're not reading. It says enforcement starts in June with a 12-month look-back window.
Yes, absolutely.
It's
that's
like
trust.
he's telling you what he's going to do. All right,
I
last lightning round, last question, then we're going to go to questions, I promise. And Lana, I'm ignoring you because you want me to stop. What will leadership look like in 2030? Emily? More diverse?
To borrow a word from you, brown.
Inclusive. Leadership has to be inclusive.
I hope it's going to start being the year of the women, and that we have inclusions of all people, because that's what we need to have.
Questions from the gang? Somebody's got to have a question. Weller, I gave you $5 beforehand. You got to have one question, Weller. Come on. Nobody, Allison, you were like the editor of Ad Age. You don't have a question? Publisher, editor, same thing. Learning the lines of journalism and business.
I'm not as bullish on the millennials as you are. I've worked with a lot of them. I was with a studio, and we did tons of social and fun. What do you do to motivate them? What do you do to get them excited about their jobs?
Yeah.
I'd love to get your insights on that.
It's a learning process. I'm not going to say that we've mastered it. I appreciate their perspective because I think it's more of where, man, I wish I even had the option to opt out when somebody told me, get your ass over there and don't come back until it's done. It just was never an option. So I think it's good for humanity, but it's challenging. I think one of the things that we've seen at MightyHive is learning and development. This has been well documented, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. This generation really expects to be trained and nourished with knowledge on the job. And it's an expectation. It is not a nice to have. And one of the first hires I made when I got to MightyHive is a vice president of learning and development who came from 4 years at McKinsey. Previously, he was a Marine jet fighter pilot for 10 years, and the guy is just personally passionate about learning and development. We reward people with additional learning opportunities, and I think that has worked out really well. The way that we recognize people, particularly when you're not, we grew at 50% last year. It's not nothing. It's also not 150%. So the promotions aren't happening every 6 to 9 months, right? But there are other ways to recognize and reward. We've invested a lot in thinking through and personalizing that, to borrow a page from AdTech, right? Understanding people's individual motivations. We go through a process called Mighty Resume to really do that. We can understand what is the right sort of thing that's going to motivate them. And it's highly personalized. But investing in their talent is something that we've seen that will not only keep people around longer, but also craft this generation of leadership and management within the company who believe in what we do. So rewarding people with knowledge and training has worked well.
I love the learning and training. How do you get the loyalty to stay? Because we've trained people, we mentor them and then they. I know it's a challenge for everybody, but it just seems like with the millennials it's a little bit more.
Yeah, we have something we call the Mighty Mafia. So we expect that.
By the way, your name is great. You got Mighty Learning, MightyHive, Mighty Training,
Mighty
Mighty Resume,
Mafia. Mighty Mafia.
You got the Mighty Lunch. You got Mighty Dogs.
We don't have Mighty Dogs. We should.
dog wants
We have
to
a
be
no
Mighty
dog
Dog.
building, which is awful.
come on.
Yeah, I know.
That's terrible.
We actually expect that people are going to leave, and we have built Mighty Resume as a vehicle to understand where they're going to go and what they're going to do. So we'll sit down with an employee and say, okay, you're 3 to 5 years out of school. Where do you want to be? What do you want to do? I mean, I don't know the answer to that question. Well, how important is money to you? Where do you want to live? You want to have kids? What type of work do you like doing? If you could pick any resume on LinkedIn that looks really cool, who is it? And then we backtrack from there and say, okay, if you look at that person, what are the experiences they acquired along the way that got them there? How are you going to get that? So when somebody goes to business school, we know about 9 months in advance, and we work with them on getting there. We'll write the recommendation. And I think that we expect that people are going to cycle in and out. And the Mighty Mafia is kind of the alumni association that we work with to stay in touch with those folks and hopefully have some of them boomerang back after they go out and get additional experience elsewhere. It's a practice that Google doesn't quite do in that way, but Google alumni are known for the same thing, and Google actually has a boomerang program to bring back old Googlers for that reason.
Yeah, no, AOL used to do that years ago, that they had created a program that as soon as they wanted to go for their MBA and the like, and they've all stayed in touch almost 25 years later.
Yeah, we have a pretty robust UWG alumni, and it's awesome. And they stay in touch. They have their own events. They live their own life, and it's really quite wonderful because they will recommend. They will send people to us even if they don't come back.
Name for networking.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Keeping people connected. Other questions?
I have a question about approaching, like, aligning with cultural moments is really important, right? So it's a way for you to align, like the brand to align with the audience and resonate with the audience. Like, how do you approach, like, building that out, or, looking to align with important cultural moments for a brand? And it's also kind of a two-part question, because you mentioned also kind of it's hard to break through the clutter and find the right channels. But if you're focusing on aligning with these important cultural moments, with all like the technology and the different platforms, I think it's also become a way for us to easily be able to surround those cultural moments.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, we live on a content calendar, right, with these high moments that, start from either culture or family. Like, Thanksgiving at UniWorld is a huge deal because we all celebrate differently. We love to see all the different foods that people bring to Thanksgiving. But it's definitely something that we want to be thoughtful about, right? What are we highlighting? What's important? And for a brand, what are you trying to accomplish? So we want to make sure that they are complementing what's happening there, that they are celebrating that particular moment in time in a way that's respectful and real, right? And hopefully that comes from a space and a place and a person that can deliver that to that client in a way that no one else could or would. And we don't want to borrow equity. We want it to be an authentic moment in time where you're really celebrating that culture. So we work with a group that celebrates Asian history, and really talking to them about the fact that there is intersectionality there, right? Like you're not a monolith, and we want to make sure that there's depth and breadth there around understanding. And it was so awesome to see the Year of the Rat put up yesterday on the Venetian, because you do finally see that, right? And people care about, well, what year was I born in, right? Like, it's really important that we can all kind of be a participant and a part of that without it having to be, you know, they're over there and I'm over here.
I hate to ask a terrible question, but just listening to you guys, and that's my job anyway. Do we think that the main 6 or 7 industry trade groups are doing enough about diversity, multiculturalism, fraud, privacy?
No.
Because they're hard questions. They're hard. None of this is something that would happen today, right? We just talked about the fact that most of these transactions, we can put it into a system, right? And we can press a button and it's done. These are human issues. This is going to take time. It's going to take reprogramming. We all come to this world and wherever we're going with these experiences, right? Good, bad, or indifferent. And we have opinions. We have stereotypes. We're all biased. So how do we work through?
It's not black and white, it's gray.
It's gray, and it's over time, right? And that's why I think it's important we start now, right? So that by 2030, we're not having this conversation. Hopefully, we're having a conversation around blue, you know, something else that is, you know, not necessarily. I hope we are able to meet each other where we are as humans and show up as open and as honest as we can, even if it's hard, because that's what we're avoiding right now. We're avoiding that hard conversation, right? We're avoiding the fact that maybe I don't have any brown friends. Maybe I don't know anybody, so I'd rather just not engage, and that's not an option.
Or the hard question of maybe we're not putting enough money into STEM in urban and rural areas for people.
Well, that's 100%
right.
the truth.
And are we not really supporting this?
Oh, but we token
talk
it,
about it.
right? We talk about it. We go and do beautiful, you know, galas
And people feel bad about it afterwards, too.
Yeah, and then, you know, but then when it comes to the rubber meeting the road, when you start talking about budgets, you start talking about allocation, you start talking about recruitment.
And can an agency or can a company that's working on the short term of Wall Street that we said earlier spend the time to train somebody that didn't get it in school and teach them these skills that they need?
That's right.
Right?
Yep. And I know I went through a training program. I went to Vanderbilt University and I still got training when I got to international paper. So it was still a matter of what does this mean to me and what does that mean to you and what does your culture need to do to make me feel like I belong?
When you were at Motorola, did you work on the Razr?
I worked on Razr.
Oh, that's so cool. That was the coolest phone. In the early days of CNN.com,
Absolutely.
we had the pilots of the rim pager, so we were the first guys on the BlackBerry, but we all got Razrs because you made a really cool product.
It was amazing, and you
That
know
was
what?
kick-ass.
One of the worst
How did
marketing.
that die?
Well, because you can't do Razrs are us.
Oh,
right?
man.
You cannot tell someone
was so
that
cool.
remember that phone was $1,500,
That was cool.
right? And when it came down that cost curve and they were BOGOs, they lost the market.
Did you work on Iridium as well?
I did. I got there when it was Iridium. Well, that's a whole.
Yes, ma'am.
We can really talk about that later.
We've been having a conversation around diversity and inclusion.
You started it a while ago at Eddie.
For
Forever.
a very
Allison.
long
Oh, yeah.
time. I am, when we talk about optimism, I am hopeful that with the changing of demography and with the conversations that we're having now, there are much more significant discussions happening and actions being taken. So I am hopeful that progress will be made because the conversation's been happening for way too long and I think rubber is starting to.
Do you think that what some of the changes that happened in California, which they had to require a certain amount of women on boards, was helping for diversity to happen? Or do you think it was being, just like surface talk?
Well, some of it is the mandate.
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, if you start forcing the issue,
Yes.
then the issue starts to be forced.
Okay.
And it's unfortunate, but it just.
Right,
And
but then-
sometimes that works. And it did
Pressure.
work in Europe very well because they started first there, that they are a requirement that at least 30% of every board in Europe, in the EU, it was required to have women on board.
I mean, I agree with that, but let's be honest. There's unintended consequences. The NFL tried the Rooney Rule. We just had 4 coaches, and they're all white other than Ron Rivera. And I mean, the truth is, they tried to force that, and they should. And then it's the question, and now you're hearing about, well, not enough. There are not enough coordinators getting opportunity. That's an analogy for everything we're talking about.
That's right.
Are enough women and brown people getting to be media directors and CEOs of the smaller agencies so they can be CEOs of the holding company.
That's right.
How do you get, it's the same analogy, right? It's how do you get people of all
And you
different.
have to be intentional.
In all different
I mean,
areas.
to a certain extent, I just don't see it as the same idea. Business is much more, it's much more expansive than looking at one area of football. So if you're trying to get more women,
Businesses in the world.
but it's one area. Healthcare is much larger, and other things are much larger than that. I mean, capital markets are much larger. They're like a pinprick
And the
in
movie
everything.
rule isn't a regulation,
Yes.
right? So
But
I
you
think
live,
that's,
okay, it was a bad analogy, but
Okay.
you get the point I was trying to make.
but I think
Look at
it-
Wall
yeah.
Street. How many women
the
are on
reality
Wall
is
Street?
it-
You
There
and I are there in
actually,
New York.
actually, there
It had to be a regulation. It has to be. I mean, that's where we are.
We're forcing it, but we're starting to see progress.
Right,
Yeah.
and then the
Progress
forcing
starts
it
happening in one
is
place.
a mechanism, and even if the forcing it feels awkward,
It has
the
to
first
happen.
woman on that board is going to have a whole lot of chutzpah.
Oh, yeah.
But by her whoever replaces her and the second woman and the third woman on that board, the men around her are going to feel more comfortable with having women.
Yeah, because then they're used to the woman being on the board, and they're used to. It doesn't matter, what her ethnicity is, what her race is, what her religious background or sexuality. They won't care because then they're going to be used to it. It's so weird that we're talking about ourselves, our species, like we're some sort of foreign entity. But that's it's strange, but it should happen. It should have happened already.
I like the NFL analogy. I appreciate because of the makeup of the players.
Yes.
Right.
Right,
Like
that's
the net there is you are managing.
70%
Absolutely, that
African American.
100%.
And the thing is, you have not pipelined that, right? The
That's
one
what I was
thing
trying to get to
that
is
the
pipeline.
NBA,
That's what I was
Okay.
trying to get to the
so
pipeline
NBA does a
thing.
really good job
You did a bad
of.
job getting there.
That's okay. Wow.
But like
No, you didn't.
RBG.
You got there.
But RBG talks all the time about Sandra Day O'Connor making it easier for her to get on the board.
Absolutely.
And now you've got Sotomayor and you've got others. It's the same thing. The
Yeah.
first one's got to break the ground, and you got to plow the ground
Right,
for the others to
right.
come behind.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
when Kagan came in, and it was like old hat, nobody cared.
Yeah.
Not that
But
anybody remembers that
RBG is a
fast
pretty
female
cool
one.
name.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm a big fan.
Yes. And she
I
works
got
out
an RBG
every.
t-shirt. Come on, everybody should have an RBG t-shirt. She's notorious. Lana, what do you want me to do?
We're just getting our Richy Glassberg t-shirts, but
Any
Is
other
your middle
questions?
initial B?
It's 3:34. You said 3:30. It's not bad for me. Only 4 minutes over.
this is
Richy's
really,
middle
I mean,
initial
this
B.
is pretty good.
This is
You're
amazing.
No.
You
Sorry.
guys have
Are we good?
We probably have room for, is there one more question?
Any other questions?
Otherwise, we'd love you to chat with everybody.
Corey?
I have a question, but it's like such a small idea compared to the big ideas and important stuff that you've been talking about, but I'm afraid to ask. But we're here at CES, and so I want to bring this back to a little bit around consumer electronics. And I'm curious what your take is 10 years down the road on the impact of the Internet of Things and smart devices and privacy and how that is going to impact media. I mean, I'm a nerd and I have way too many Google listening devices in my house, and I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old that actually spend their time talking to Google and making stuff happen. And wondering, like, now with millennials, like, now we've got the next generation of coming, and I'm wondering what you think the media landscape looks like in a media landscape that is completely informed by COPA non-compliant people providing so much information and into the data stream.
Wow. That's loaded. Well,
Yeah.
It's selfish, it's
Well,
my
that's
house.
all right. You got 4 and 2.
Me personally, and I've been in tech for a long time, I don't have any of those listening devices in my house. I think until we have real legislation that has teeth in it, I turned off all my privacy settings. I follow Kara Swisher. I do what she says about privacy settings. I think she's right. And I think the pendulum swung too far. And I don't think we understand what this tech did in the last 10 years. And I don't have it in my house. I don't have little kids. I don't have it in my house. I just think that we don't understand the implications of that. And there isn't real, I don't think the regulators understand what Google is. I don't
No,
think they
but-
understand what Facebook is. And I don't think they understand what the internet is, to be honest with you.
Well, listen, it's not really for the regulators, and we're talking about more the legislators on that. The legislators never really know anything about any of the laws that they do. They're supposed to be working with the background consultants that are supposed to express what the idea of where their position's supposed to be. Because if they truly knew, I mean, you have committees where none of these people have ever served in certain things, and they're on it. It's mind-boggling on it. But there should be very good, consultants that they work with and lobbyists that they work with that actually are informing them on how and making their own informed decisions on this, because these are just general ideas about their constituents.
I don't have any of those devices either. I have a 6 and 3. They have iPads, but they're all private. They can just do what they need to. I'm skeptical about all of it, and to Richie's point, I just don't think there's been enough study around it. And then having come from Motorola, I've seen, I know too much.
Right.
Yeah. Look, I think I am skeptical. I haven't totally opted out. I have some devices in my home, but I'm knowledgeable about it. I think what encourages me is that increasingly, like, my parents are knowledgeable about some of the trade-offs. They don't understand the mechanics, right? But they do understand, do I really want to put that into Google? That's great. So whether the legislators and regulators get there, the fact that, whether it's because of the Cambridge Analytica stuff or people are becoming more aware. And I think that that's generally going to be good. I also think people are going to be skeptical. IoT, when it first came onto the scene as like even a thing, it was very hard for me to understand, why do I need my television or my refrigerator to talk to my phone? And I think that's still an open question. But yet there are at least more than 2 refrigerators that talk to multiple devices on the floor right now, right? So I think we can vote as consumers with our dollars. What are we going to invest in? What are we going to buy? And that's not just going to be about the trade-offs of data, but what am I getting in exchange for that? So I'm hopeful that people are just a little bit more gun-shy and knowledgeable, and that could only increase. And that'll force the type of more empathetic technology that I think people want in all of this.
So Kara Swisher wrote about a book that I will shamelessly plug called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. I just started reading on the plane out here. I thought I was militant against having that stuff. I'm even more. I mean, when you you read what is happening, and I think more people should read that. And I really feel like that pendulum is over here, and it's got to come back to privacy and the consumer. And I think privacy and the ability for you to have privacy in your home, Corey, and in my home, I think that is a bedrock of our country.
I think the Ring thing was really huge.
Huge.
I mean, that was huge. I mean, people are watching their children, right? There's supposed to be safety on the inside.
Right.
And then this crazy man.
Right. And then the same thing with like the Colin Kaepernick, the fact that they were selling it to police without people knowing about it. And I mean, my feeling is, if you really can control all those things, if you want that, that's great. I want an alarm system that calls the fire department if I'm not there, if I'm on fire. Yep. That's a benefit to me. Or if I'm asleep, I want it to call the fire department if I'm on fire.
Of course.
Total benefit to me, right? When it's taking my temperature settings and selling it to 1,000 people to do predictive modeling on gas prices, I'm not so much that I think that's a benefit to me, right? So I think we have to get to a place where we have control, and I think the pendulum swung and we don't have control, and we don't realize that we don't have control.
Well, thank you all. Thank you. This was
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well.